Hello everyone, today I want to talk to you about the soybean war. The US is at its wits' end when it comes to China. Also, the US Treasury Secretary is acting like a Q, since they can't invest in China, they just say the US never wanted to anyway. President Trump is tough-talking with many countries, but China and Russia are the exceptions. Recently, he brought up the soybean issue, which is worth discussing. On August 12th, both China and the US announced that the 90-day tariff truce would be extended for another 90 days. The day before, Trump had already signed the relevant executive order. After signing the order, late at night he posted on his own social media platform, Truth Social, saying that China was worried about a soybean shortage, and that America's great farmers could produce the best quality soybeans. He hoped China would quickly triple its soybean orders. Trump believes this would be a way to reduce the US trade deficit with China. The next day, White House spokesperson Riley repeated Trump's words at a press conference, but said that they wanted China to increase its soybean orders by 4 times. Whether it's 3 times or 4 times, it doesn't really matter anymore. Trump spoke in a very high-profile manner, saying that China was worried about a soybean shortage. But as described by the mainland South media outlet Hoxia Yuguang, in reality, Trump could no longer hide his frustration at being unable to turn the situation around. What he was really saying was, American soybeans aren't selling. China, could you help us out? The situation facing American soybean farmers is extremely severe. On August 13th, Reuters quoted soybean traders as saying that, with the peak season for U.S. soybean sales approaching, buyers from China, the world's largest soybean importer, have shifted all their orders to Brazil. This year, U.S. soybean exporters may miss out on billions of dollars worth of sales to China. 3 traders revealed that Chinese importers have already completed their soybean purchases for September, totaling about 8 million tons, all sourced from South America. In addition, Chinese buyers have already secured about 4 million tons of soybeans for October, about half of their total purchases for that month, which are also coming from South America. Last year, Chinese oilseed importers bought about 7 million tons of soybeans from the United States in September and October. Looking at the whole of last year, China imported about 105 million tons of soybeans, of which 22.13 million tons came from the United States, valued at $12 billion US. Traders say that with the ongoing unresolved tensions in China-US trade relations, China may stay out of purchasing U.S. crops for the marketing year starting in September for an extended period, which would put significant pressure on Chicago soybean futures. These futures prices have already fallen to their lowest levels in nearly 5 years. China began importing U.S. soybeans in 1995, and usually starts booking soybeans harvested in the fall at the beginning of the year. Most of the soybeans China purchases from the U.S. are shipped between September and the following January. In the later months, after the harvest in South America, supplies from Brazil will take over. A report says that by the end of this year or early next year, there may be some sales opportunities for U.S. soybeans, but if tariffs between China and the U.S. remain unchanged, the volume could be very limited. In recent years, as China-US relations have deteriorated, soybeans from Brazil and Argentina have quickly filled the gap left by China buying less U.S. soybeans in the market. Reuters reports that although U.S. soybean producers have been working hard to find other buyers, no country can compare to China. Several U.S. agricultural media outlets have reported that China has yet to start purchasing new season U.S. soybeans, making this the latest start in nearly 20 years. They worry that, in the end, China might not place a single order at all. This year, the U.S. a bumper soybean harvest, producing 90 million tons. American farmers are happy to harvest, but if China stops buying U.S. soybeans, they suffer losses. Lagrand, president of the American Soybean Association, urged Trump to stop the trade war with China, or their livelihoods are jeopardized. The Trump administration has already suspended the new tariffs on China for another 90 days, but traders believe that simply extending the deadline is unlikely to boost soybean purchases, because even with most tariffs temporarily lifted, the import tariff on U.S. soybeans in China is still 23%, making them uncompetitive. Only if an agreement to lower tariffs can be reached will China be able to resume buying U.S. soybeans. This has become a dead end. At the beginning of this year, the US imposed a so-called 20% fentanyl tariff on China, while in March, China imposed tariffs of 10 to 15% on US agricultural products and energy, including a 10% tariff on soybeans. Later, at the Sino-US Geneva meeting, both sides agreed to lower their reciprocal tariffs after April 2 to 10%. Adding the original 3% tariff soybeans, a total tariff of 23%. If China is to lower the tariff on US soybeans to 13%, China will demand that the US remove the 20% fentanyl tariff. US Treasury Secretary Pester said in a media interview that before the US considers lowering the 20% fentanyl tariff on China, there needs to be progress on the issue of fentanyl flowing into the US for several months, several quarters, or even a year before the tariff can be reduced. It will be very difficult for the US to lower the 20% fentanyl tariff on China soon. So how can China reduce the 10% tariff on US soybeans? If tariffs can't be reduced, how can Chinese importers be expected to buy US soybeans with a 23% tariff? In this soybean battle, the US is anxious, China isn't. American farmers pressure their government, how Trump responds. China can buy US soybeans if tariffs are lowered. Also, US Treasury Secretary Pester paved way for Trump-Putin meeting, gave interviews. When Pester was interviewed by Fox News on August 10, he discussed he urged the EU, Japan, South Korea, and other countries to make significant investments in the US. So how will these investments happen? Pester said this money will be put into a sovereign wealth fund to build factories in the US for industries like semiconductors, rare earth magnets, pharmaceuticals, or steel. These are all industries the US needs to regain control. Besant explained the American logic with a laugh, saying that since these countries have made money from the US and have large trade surpluses with America, they should reinvest that money back into the US by building factories here. He said Trump likes building factories in the US, and foreign countries will pay for them. The host pressed, asking, since China also has a large trade surplus with the US, does that mean China will also have to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in the US, like Japan, South Korea, and the EU, as part of a trade agreement? Besant's answer was no. He said there was no requirement for China to invest huge sums in the US, because much of the investment would go to key industries that need to be brought back to the US, many of which are industries that need to be reshored from China, whether it's semiconductors, rare earth magnets, or steel. Besant said, in his view, investment from China into the US is not going to happen. Interpreting Besant's remarks from another angle, the US can force the EU, Japan, and South Korea to sign humiliating, one-sided agreements and pour massive investments into America, but it simply can't force China to do the same. So Besant changed his tune, saying that the US doesn't want investment from China. This kind of statement is full of the AQ spirit. If you can't get something, you just claim you never wanted it in the first place. In addition, when Besant was interviewed by Bloomberg, he also talked about the issue of secondary sanctions on Russian energy. The host kept pressing him, why does the US only sanction India and impose tariffs on India, but doesn't sanction China, even though China is the biggest buyer of Russian energy? Besant then told a story. He said that at the G7 summit held in Canada this June, leaders of the European member states discussed a US bill proposed by Republican Senator Graham regarding secondary sanctions on buyers of Russian energy. The ever-hawkish Graham drafted the 2025 Sanctions on Russia Act in April, which stipulates that the US will impose tariffs of no less than 500% on products from countries that conduct energy trade with Russia. At that time, America's allies at the G7 meeting were all talking animatedly about Graham's bill. Besant said that he himself asked the G7 leaders at the time, is everyone here willing to impose a 200% secondary tariff on China? Besant said, and then, guess what happened? Everyone just looked down at their own shoes. No one wanted to answer. On the show, Besant didn't hold back and sharply criticized, saying that Trump was about to meet with Russian President Putin, while the Europeans were hiding on the sidelines, pointing fingers and lecturing us about what to do and how to do it. Now, it's either take action or keep quiet. To sum it up, first, Bessant's main point was actually to tell the EU to shut up. Second, Bessant brought up the story at the G7 to say, if you Europeans are so smart and bold, then go ahead and slap a 200% tariff on China. But in the end, not a single person dared to take up the challenge. Third, Bessant spoke the truth and exposed a fact. When even the US can't get tough with China, you timid bunch in the EU really shouldn't be so opinionated.